mind can be purified of them, and that we are not forced to continue taking involuntary rebirths under their influence. The fact that most people have not got rid of them is due to their lack of interest. Whether we attain liberation or remain caught in the cycle of birth and death depends on whether or not we gain a correct understanding of reality. Even a doubt which tends in the right direction causes the fabric of cyclic existence to begin disintegrating. Fear of emptiness and prejudice make us cling to our habits and are obstacles to the attainment of liberation. Only a sense of strong antipathy to the process in which we are trapped can act as the necessary spur to attaining freedom.
Although understanding the nature of reality is of such vital importance, it is not taught to everyone at once because most people are not ready to understand it. If it is misunderstood or rejected, the consequences are extremely grave. It is therefore wise to proceed cautiously. First, people should be discouraged from doing unwholesome things and encouraged to do what is wholesome. They should then be helped to overcome gross misconceptions regarding the self and finally the subtler ones, until all wrong views have been eradicated. In doing so, great skill must be employed to ensure that students understand conventional reality correctly. Unless they do, they will not be able to understand ultimate truth. Even if we cannot attain liberation in this life as a result of receiving instruction on emptiness, it will leave a profound imprint which will bear fruit of its own accord in future. Just as our attachment to the body ends when we recognize that it is bound to disintegrate, all other disturbing emotions will end when we understand the dependently arising nature of all phenomena. Cyclic existence comes to an end when the causes that produce it are incomplete. Liberation is therefore possible.
Having gained a sound understanding of conventional truths as they actually are, and having purified the mind by developing the prerequisite Mahayana intention, the student is ready to be introduced to ultimate truth. Though there are as many permanent as impermanent phenomena, the former are more subtle and thus more difficult to comprehend. This is because they cannot be apprehended by the senses, but only by mental perception and primarily by conceptual awareness. Inability to identify correctly what is permanent leads to the misidentification of permanent phenomena as functional things and of certain impermanent things as permanent. The 9th chapter presents a general introduction to the refutation of true existence by refuting that the self, space, time, particles and liberation are permanent functional things. This is shown to be a contradiction in terms. The refutation of misconceptions regarding the self and time are treated briefly here, and at length in the 10th and 11th chapters.
The protagonist in Gyel-tsap's dialogue argues that there are certain phenomena which are both functional and permanent and are neither produced by other factors nor give rise to effects, while others are causes but not effects. It is impossible for anything to be permanent and also a functional thing as is claimed, for whatever arises in dependence upon other factors, i.e. causes and conditions, is not permanent. A functional thing always has a cause, while that which is permanent never has. It is impossible for a functional thing to be neither cause nor effect, nor for it to be only a cause but not itself an effect as is claimed, since both are contrary to the normal operation of cause and effect. Anything that undergoes a transformation to produce an effect cannot be permanent, nor can a cause and an effect have totally disparate natures such that the one is permanent and the other impermanent. To demonstrate that particles are not truly existent partless phenomena as asserted, it is shown that they have sides and do not therefore interpenetrate completely when they come together to form a composite. Moreover, in forming such a composite, particles could not move unless they had parts, such as a fore and rear. Since they undergo change during the formation of the composite, how can they be permanent? The causal particles no longer exist once the effect has been produced.
Finally, the chapter presents a critique of liberation as asserted by the opponent. It cannot be a functional phenomenon as claimed, for then it should produce an effect, but none can be identified. This is followed by a discussion of what attains liberation and what exists as a basis when liberation occurs, in the course of which it is demonstrated that the basis cannot be a permanent truly existent self. Although the objects refuted in this chapter are those of speculative conceptions of true existence, their refutation is a vital step toward undermining the innate conception of true existence. Both Buddhists and proponents of non-Buddhist systems in which there is a belief in liberation from suffering posit the self as the basis both for the states of bondage and release. The identity and attributes of this self, which is therefore of great importance, are variously described, supported by numerous reasons. Most of these systems identify the self as a permanent functional thing. The 10th chapter shows the impossibility of the self's existence according to these assertions.
Chapter 10 begins by examining the self as asserted by the Vaisesikas. First, it is shown that gender, which differs from one life to the next, is incompatible with the idea of a permanent self. Nor can a permanent intangible self act as agent of the body's movements, as is claimed, since only something tangible can cause motion. A permanent self would be invulnerable to harm of any kind and would therefore not need to seek spiritual practices as a means of protection. Nor does memory of past lives establish the self as permanent, but demonstrates the presence of a continuum of consciousness, consisting of moments which arise in dependence upon each other. If, as is claimed, the person were mindless matter only capable of memory through an association with consciousness, then the person could not be permanent and unchanging, since it would first lack and then possess the faculty of remembering. Moreover, something which at different times has different attributes, such as pleasure and pain, cannot be permanent either. The Samkhya assertion that a permanent conscious person exists is then examined and its flaws are revealed. What role would the eyes and other senses play, if such a continually conscious person existed? If the person is claimed to be potentially conscious, the self and consciousness could not be a permanent indifferentiable entity, for then the person but not consciousness would exist before an object is experienced. Any transition from potential consciousness to actual consciousness indicates that the person is not permanent. The Nayaka assertion that there is a vast permanent partless self which is present in each being is next shown to be illogical, for then that which is one person's self should also be another's. This is followed by an examination of the Samkhya belief that the creative force is unconscious matter with the capacity to produce virtue and non-virtue but with no capacity to experience their effects. On the other hand, if, as the Vaisesikas claim, the self is the doer of actions and experiencer of their results, how can it be permanent, for this necessarily entails transformation from a previous state to a subsequent one. A permanent self would be invulnerable to the suffering of cyclic existence and would therefore not need to seek release. Moreover, if the self were truly existent, how could giving up conceptions of a self be the means to attain liberation, as is claimed?
All these views are based on a failure to understand that impermanence does not necessitate discontinuation. Nothing impermanent can be produced from a permanent cause. Therefore, a permanent self is not feasible as an initiating cause of activity. Products which undergo change moment by moment are neither permanent nor do they discontinue. This becomes clear when we correctly understand the nature of dependent arising, for though the cause ceases to exist when the effect is produced and is therefore not permanent, an effect has arisen from it and thus there is continuity. Although the views of the self refuted in this chapter are speculative ones, their refutation is an essential step toward the refutation of the innate conception of the self. If the self existed as it appears to the innate conception, it would necessarily exist in the ways refuted here. The 11th chapter continues the refutation of truly existent time, begun in the 9th chapter, as part of the extensive presentation of the selflessness of phenomena with specific reference to products. By refuting the true existence of functional things existing in a temporal context, it is shown that time itself cannot have true existence. Time can neither be a permanent functional thing nor an independent cause, because past, present and future can only be posited in dependence on one another. Neither time nor that which exists within a temporal context can be posited except in relation to each.